This is Football at 4.
Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. I saw betting odds yesterday for people to replace Nick Sirianni. The leader in the clubhouse was Vrabel. So Geoff Mosher. Today, the Eagles had their locker clean-out day. No availability for Howie Roseman, Jeffrey Lurie, and most importantly, no Nick Sirianni. I mean, a couple of years ago, Peterson did speak on this day, and then he was gone. I guess the Eagles learned their lesson, or is there more to read into it as to why Sirianni did not speak on a day where normally they do some wrapping up of the season?
Yeah, I forget. I think in the past that they've had the coach and the GM do their press conference the day after locker cleanout or sometime in the week. It's usually within the first 4 or 5 days. I don't know that it's always the same day. So obviously we'll be waiting to see if there's one of that. Now, usually it doesn't always mean, though, as we've seen in the past with Doug Peterson, right, that if Howie and the head coach have a press conference and talk about what went wrong and what they're going to fix, it doesn't mean that the owner has decided, okay, that I agree with you, because as we saw with Doug Peterson several days later, well, twice, right? The first time Doug said his coaches were staying, then a couple of days they got fired. And then the second time Doug and Howie had a press conference, and then a couple of days later, more than a couple of days later, Doug was fired. So it's hard to make anything other than this. I think if the Eagles were just dead set, if Jeffrey Lurie, and we all saw how he looked in that box in Monday night at Raymond James Stadium, if he was so disgusted and felt like he needed to fire Nick Sirianni, probably would have been done already. Doesn't mean he's not, but what he typically does is have meetings with his GM, with his head coach, to figure out what went wrong, what is the way to fix it, and do I trust your way to fix it? If you go back to the Doug Peterson firing, they had a meeting. Doug said his side of the story. Jeffrey listened. Jeffrey and Howie may have felt other changes were needed. And there was sort of this, let's talk again a couple days later to see if maybe we get on the same page. And Doug did not make any type of changes to what he stood fast. And then Jeffrey Lurie decided to fire him. And so that took a couple of days, and we'll just have to see the conversations that are going to take place. As I understand it, I know Howie and Nick have had have met inside the Novacare already since the end of the season. But I don't believe that the meeting with the owner takes place either today or tomorrow. Obviously, they'll have discussions.
What kind of questions do you think they want answers to?
Oh, well, I mean, clearly, if you're Jeffrey Lurie, if you're Howie Roseman, you want to know what went wrong on offense and defense. I suspect they're smart enough to understand what went wrong on defense more so, but they have to figure out not only what in Nick Sirianni's mind was the issue with the offense, but how does he plan to fix it? How does he plan to fix the offense? How does he plan to fix the defense? Who are people that he's thinking can come in here and bring a fresh perspective to both sides of the football? What is his role going to be in that? And how does he plan to reset the locker room culture after a collapse? That is what Jeffrey Lurie has to hear.
I want to bring up a scenario to you, and I want you to kind of grade it on how far-fetched or realistic it could be, okay? Mm-hmm. So we have a situation here. Did Sirianni have Petula? Was he the guy he wanted to be the coordinator?
Can't tell you that. I mean, if obviously a lot of those decisions are collaborative, and Kevin Petullo got a promotion in the offseason from pass game coordinator to pass game coordinator / assistant head coach or associate head coach, something like that.
Okay.
So clearly that is Nick Sirianni's right-hand man.
So I'm trying to put some pieces together of what could have happened in this situation. And could Sirianni have endorsed Petula? Hurts signs a $250 million deal. He picks Brian Johnson. The organization sides with Hurts, and now you have this triangle of finger pointing. Well, Brian Johnson's not doing a good job, and then you have, I wanted my guy. You didn't give me my guy. So is he now fighting for his guy, or do they say Brian Johnson's going to be the guy and he's not going to run your offense, he's going to run his offense?
Mike, the Eagles are an organization that certainly listens to players. They've had leadership councils. Obviously, a lot of the changes that we saw on defense from play caller to structure were made with some, I don't want to say where the team went and looked for the input, but they were getting feedback from the players. However, in the scenario you're asking me, to say that Jalen Hurts picked Brian Johnson or that it was his decision or that he factored into the decision, that's not something I ever heard. That's not something I know to be true. Brian Johnson was the quarterback's coach, and the Eagles promoted him to offensive coordinator, which would have been a natural spot. Sure, Kevin Patullo would have also been a person who could fill that role. But I don't know that really matters in the big scale of the offense because Kevin Patullo is the pass game coordinator, and the Eagles threw the ball a lot this year. And sometimes they didn't throw the ball well. So his fingerprints have to be there just as much as Brian Johnson or Nick Sirianni or anybody's on that offense.
And my point, I guess, is more, I don't want to say dissension, but finger pointing. Well, this wasn't the guy I wanted, and now I don't like the job he's doing, and we're struggling, and you gave me this guy. I had a guy that I wanted to be the play caller, and you didn't like my guy. And, is that an underlying of, Hurts siding with the play caller instead of the head coach, and the head coach saying, well, I got two guys that are against me, and I've lost some respect in the room because you didn't let me pick my guy. I feel like this is similar to the whole Peterson situation where they gave him a guy. It wasn't the guy he wanted, or the guy he wanted they didn't want, and he just said, I'm out of here. And I think Peterson had more leg to stand on than Sirianni does because he won a Super Bowl. Now, I don't know what you think Sirianni's resume will do for him in getting another job if he stands up for himself, or does he just have to say, you know what, I got nothing else. I'm taking it, and I'll just do what they tell me.
Well, I mean, I think Nick Sirianni himself has to acknowledge that the offense didn't look right. And, even if he feels that it wasn't the play caller or it wasn't the assistant head coach, it was more on the quarterback, it doesn't really matter because it didn't work. And so he's got to bring in something that works, and he's going to have to swallow some humble pie if he feels that way and say, I'm probably going to have to get myself a coordinator who can bring a fresh perspective to this offense while I remain CEO head coach. Remember, Nick Sirianni has admitted that he didn't do a great job as a play caller the first 6 games of his career as Eagles head coach. He was not a play caller for the Indianapolis Colts under Frank Reich either. So play calling is not necessarily Nick Sirianni's specialty. So it shouldn't be difficult for him to say, I might need fresh perspectives, fresh play callers, and a different person helping me create the menu from which to choose the plays from.
Yeah, and look, I feel like we're all just go gadget arms trying to reach for something because of the unprecedented nature of what we just watched, Moshe. And if you just said the Eagles went 11-6 and got knocked out in the first round of the playoffs, but played competitive football, it was just, poor clock management, or they had an injury, a guy stepped out of bounds, a la Dak Prescott in the Dallas game, and that's why those things can maybe be fine-tuned. The aesthetics of the way they lost is totally in play here, is it not?
Oh, completely. And not just that game, but yeah, the aesthetics of losing to the two of the worst teams in football. I mean, which is what they did when they lost also to the Cardinals and the Giants. So yeah, I think if they just struggled down the stretch, mostly defensively, and then lost a game to the Bucs because you didn't have A.J. Brown and you lost, you couldn't score too much and your defense couldn't hold it, so you lose like 25-14. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something like that. I think Jeffrey Lurie looks at the situation and says, yeah, clearly the defense has to be overhauled, has to be fixed, but we don't have necessarily a culture problem or an issue with the head coach figuring it out. The way they lost for 6 and 7 weeks and you never saw any changes, never saw any sign of life, had to have sounded an alarm within Lurie about how capable his head coach is about having an answer when times are tough.
You could make an argument that if they played the same schedule again,
they go, 3-14?
Right. I mean, the stretch of games with Kansas City and Buffalo and Miami and Dallas and that whole, they would have lost every one of them and gave up 50 in every one. I mean, they should have given up 50 the other night to Tampa Bay. If they could simply catch the football, you would have given up 50. So you got to look at this team and say, if we played the same schedule and started this season over, we wouldn't be 11-5, 11-6 in the playoffs. We'd be 3-14, and then we would be firing our coach.
Right. Yeah, you could make that argument. But that's so. I had this conversation with somebody today who wants to see Nick Sirianni fired. This is a fan who I know, and I said. He said, won't Jeffrey Lurie look at that, what you just said, Mike, the fact that they were basically a non-competitive team that might lose every single game it played if you redid it as a reason to fire a coach? And I said that owners personnel people typically don't weigh the losses more than they weigh the wins. You know what I'm saying? Like, they don't look at 1-6 and say, that's who you are. They look at the entirety. Remember, they hired this guy, and they told the public they believed in him, and they looked great for about 75 to 80% of the last 3 years in this, right? I mean, if we're going to talk about their collapses and how awful they looked, you have to acknowledge, at least if you're an owner and you're trying to be fair about this, right, that there are some amazing wins. They won 25 of 32 games at one point, which is an amazing historic clip. I remember talking to you earlier in the year and saying, fans really need to cherish this because there is going to be a reality check at some point. I didn't think it was going to be this bad in 1-6, but they were winning at such a historic clip. Now, you as an owner and a GM, they're going to look at that and say that matters too. He had answers at that point. He didn't have answers in the last 7 weeks. Let's hear what he has to say about why he didn't have those answers and what his answers are about going forward.
Didn't he once say in a press conference this year, if I had those answers, something to that extent?
The man doesn't win the press conferences. We know that.
I mean, seriously, he said in a press conference, I recall a couple of weeks ago, if we had the answers to some of the problems we're having, I think you can. I actually have the audio here. I'll play it for you. Here you go.
I don't give what we are out there and what our record is or anything, what losing streak or winning streak it goes. We're going to go out there and we're going to work our minds on the detail of what's going on full speed to the snap out there in walkthrough and then high intensity at practice. There's no magic to this. Like, hey, we do this or that. Like if we knew exactly what it was, these last couple of weeks, we would have done that. So it's about going to work every single day.
That's a pretty bad answer.
Well, what his message there, and you hear this, it was bad, but you also, how many times do we hear this from a coach where when times are tough, you just double down on what you know to be true as a coach coming through. And that's what a lot of coaches will tell you. It's, they practice to do better than what they're doing, right? So when they don't do it on game day, it's frustrating and befuddling. And there wasn't a magic button. It's not like they did one thing wrong. Like they couldn't execute a screen. They couldn't defend a screen. They couldn't defend a bunch route. They couldn't get, enough pressure on the passer. They could not stop a blitz. So, I mean, Nick Sirianni had so many different things to fix. It's hard to fix it all in a couple of weeks when it starts to spiral out of control.
Yeah,
like
and
that.
I guess, the question I asked you at the beginning is, what are they asking him is, okay, what went wrong? And then what are you doing to try to fix this? Because it seems that your offense has been figured out and the defensive scheme that you believe in is no longer a scheme that is working in this league.
Right. That to me will be the number one question and answer in that. It's less about what went wrong. We all saw it. It's more about how are you going to fix it? And if I'm Jeffrey Lurie and if I'm Julian Lurie and if I'm Howie Roseman, do I believe the answers that I hear? Do I believe that what Nick Sirianni tells me can actually happen?
Do they figure out a way to to get rid of the Bradbury Slay? Are they both back, or one of them, or are they both gone?
Yeah, I think Slay can be back. They obviously have to get younger at that position. They have to get more talented. They have to get more dynamic. Can't rely on rookie free agents and first-year and second-year guys and undrafted guys. But yeah, I think they're going to have to figure out a way to just eat the cap hit with James Bradbury, probably post-June 1 which splits up the cap hit. If Jason Kelce does retire, they save some money there, move Juergens to center. He's still on a rookie deal, right? But the bottom line is that Jalen Hurts now is when the cap money really starts to inflate too. So they're going to have to be – it's going to be interesting to see how they draft. It's going to be interesting, Mike, to see what they do at backup quarterback now that $7 million could be a little expensive. $7 to $9 million for a backup quarterback. When they were in this position last time is when they drafted Jalen Hurts. So I'll be very interested to see what they decide to do at backup quarterback, knowing their money is going to be a little tight. They got extensions to give out too.
You think A.J. Brown is gone, or is he definitively back?
I think it's hard to answer personnel questions until we absolutely know the state of the coaching staff, state of the front office. But I don't see why you wouldn't have A.J. Brown back if you're trying to win games.
No, I think the organization would want him back, but right. I mean, does he want to be here? Was there any feeling that, the way it kind of ended there, that's a factor?
He doesn't really have, unless he wants to hold out and force something, he doesn't have much of a leverage here or an option.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sometimes your mouth can be leveraged and just talk your way on out of here, right?
Sometimes.
Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham. I know Brandon wants to play one more year. Fletcher's a free agent. They both are. One, both, neither.
It's very possible both come back. And, I don't think I know we talk about the age of the Eagles defense and the concern there. But in this case, that's not a concern to me. And I don't even think that those are like, if you wrote a list of the top 50 things the Eagles have to be concerned with, right, in this offseason, that's probably hovering around the low. Graham is under contract. It's not that expensive. He's a good situational pass rusher. If you want to have him aboard, fine. If you don't, if he wants to call it quits or if you want to move on, I don't think it changes the dynamic that much. Same thing with Fletcher Cox. I think he plays at a high enough level that you can have him back. Now, maybe you want him at a different price tag than you had last time. Or maybe you just continue to pay him what you're paying him, but he gives you good reps. I don't blame the whole pass rush collapse on the front line. I really do believe that when quarterbacks know exactly what they want to do with the ball and get rid of it immediately, it's very hard to generate pass rush. He still plays hard, and he's still a good leader.
All right, speaking of Fletcher Cox, he said, quote, "What is there to talk about? The man's a winner. We don't look at firing a man who's won 10 games 2 years in a row and made the playoffs 3 years in a row. Have some respect." Some pretty strong support for Nick Sirianni there. Is that an indication that Fletcher Cox knows he's leaving?
I don't know. I think that the players are all in the same boat we are. They know that management and ownership is not easy to pin down, and that minds can change. Again, you go back to Doug. Seemed like Doug was fine because they all had the press conference, they had the meeting, and then 4 days later, if you listen to ITB, you knew Doug wasn't fine. But for the public, most of them thought, all right, that's it, fine. And then, bam, a firing.
Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds podcast. And, of course, you can get that on all podcasting platforms, the Inside the Birds YouTube channel. Just search Inside the Birds. And, of course, football at 4. The offseason is here. We've got a lot of offseason. I mean, they have a ton of free agent questions, specifically on the defensive side of the ball, right? I mean, you got a lot on defense. You're probably going to need at least – I guess Dean is back. Do you pencil him back in as a starter, or do you need at least 2 new linebackers, even if Dean is here? 2 probably safeties, I would imagine. Again, I mean, Sidney Brown is probably not part of the equation. You might need 2 corners, at least 1, maybe 2 with Maddox. You got a lot of stuff on defense. And then if Kelce retires, which I still think he's going to retire. I know today he did walk it back, but I think he just wants to do it on his own terms. You would put Juergens at center, and then either Steen or now you need a right guard, and you have a decision to make with the running back.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, to your point on linebacker, you need depth. And when I say depth, I don't mean you need bodies. I mean, you need some guys who can play at the NFL level. You're right. You don't know what you're going to get from Nakobe Dean. He did not hold up well. All the things that we said on Inside the Birds when people were telling us we're crazy, he's going to be a rock star, he's going to be amazing, we're doubting him. When we're just telling you what the why he was a 3rd-round pick. The NFL was scared of him holding up in an NFL defense when he doesn't have the greatest set of, defensive linemen around him like he did. I mean, he has a good one in the Eagles, but and he's playing all these snaps and he's doing things he wasn't asked to do at Georgia. We told people that could be a little roll of dice here, and he did not stay healthy.
I like Dean. I got to admit, I like Dean. I thought he was finally going to be a playmaking linebacker for them, someone who could do multiple thing, cover, go side to side, cause turnovers, just be an active linebacker. And all the stuff we heard in training camp started to. He's not big enough. He's not going to get through the season. And that happened right off the bat. He came back for a week, and then he was gone again. So yeah, I can't count on him. He's Avonte Maddox playing linebacker.
Yeah, and I have the same fear for Nolan Smith. Not that he's not going to be good. It's not that I think he's going to be banged up. Oh,
he's tiny, man. When
but that's the reason, right? He was not going to be the pick if Jalen. People think are convinced that they were going to pick Nolan Smith if Jalen Carter wasn't there. And no matter what we said on ITB, we say no, that's not the case. He's certainly had great athletic traits, and the Eagles love that. But he went low first round for a reason, and getting bigger and getting stronger was one of those reasons. And you saw it. He was getting blocked by wide receivers at times, tight ends. He has to get bigger and stronger and be able to play more reps in the league. And maybe he will and be really good.
When you see him on an NFL field with big men, on the college field, he blends in. On that NFL field, you see three on the field, and you're saying, my man's small. I mean, he is tiny.
Yeah. But his practice habits are great. His intellect is great. He's got all the tools.
Yeah.
He didn't get hurt. He just has to get bigger and stronger. That's all. And they got to, and I'm sure maybe usage, not just lining him up one way and letting him block and moving around and get him out of, unless you want to make the full-time transition there because you don't think he can be an edge rusher. The whole idea of making him an off-ball linebacker in the middle of the season was just crap. I'm sorry. That was just
it's like what they did with
mind-bogglingly dumb decisions.
Like what they did with Davion Taylor. I mean, you draft a guy because he's a speed freak athlete, and then you tried to make him a middle linebacker because
but at least he was a linebacker in college. It wasn't like he was an edge rusher in college.
Right.
But yes,
still,
you drafted a guy with almost no experience. 1 year of off-ball linebacker, where he's basically a linebacker / slot defender, and then thought he was going to be this, tenacious 3-down linebacker for you. That was bad decision too.
Geoff Mosher and the Inside the Birds podcast guys, all offseason for football at 4. Sadly, the offseason here, but a very interesting one underway. And we'll see it all unfold. What will Howie Roseman do? Money to spend, not a lot. How's he get out of some of these deals? What decisions are there to make? Find out. Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash. Thanks, Jeff.